Warning, Gory Storytime is a horror movie review show with a 13-year-old host. So, if you are not amused by the idea of a child describing R-rated graphic scenes of violence and death, or do not want movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s spoiled, this may not be the show for you. Parental guidance is suggested.
Yeah, so guide your parents out of the room so we can have some fun.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Gory Storytime.
I'm your host, Jason.
And I'm Craig, and this is the show where my son and I review horror movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and talk about our favorite form of movie, horror films.
Yes.
And before we start with this week's episode, we want to start a new section where if we make mistakes in anything that we talk about in previous episodes, we correct them when we notice them. And for this week, our grave mistake, as we're going to call it, is last week we mentioned that Johnny Depp had been in 21 Jump Street prior to Nightmare on Elm Street. Turns out that was very incorrect. Jump Street didn't start until 1987. Elm Street came out in 1984. It was his first film role at all, TV or otherwise. So just to correct a mistake from last week.
Yep.
And this week, would you like to tell them what our movie choice was?
We are, I forgot the word. Reviewing Friday the 13th.
The original. Absolutely.
First.
So we'll get started with the trailer first, and then we'll get into the show.
Hello? Who's that? Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
1, 2, 3,
We weren't doing anything. We were just messing with
4, 5, 6,
Must be my imagination.
7,
Can I help you? Hello?
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, Friday the 13th. You may only see it once, but that will be enough. Friday the 13th.
Well, we watched this very classic horror film. I mean, first we started with Freddy, and of course we had to go into the Jason films, which I know in this case
It's his mother, but
let's start off with some interesting facts about Friday the 13th. First and foremost, producer Sean Cunningham, not a big fan of the mask as you have on your head there. He did not come up with the concept of Jason wearing a hockey mask. He did not like that became synonymous with his creation.
or any part of Jason.
That appeared in
The
third episode, which was in 3D originally.
episode?
Well, once you have 10 or more, it's an episode. It might as well be a TV series at that point.
Star Wars had 6 episodes.
Exactly. See? So he definitely hates the fact that when
The
people
hockey
see the
mask.
hockey mask,
They're like, Jason.
absolutely. Well,
Sean Cunningham worked with Wes Craven on Last House on the Left and the first Nightmare on Elm Street.
pretty interesting considering people thought, oh, Freddy, Jason, they hated, these companies
Companies
different
hated
companies.
each other.
Absolutely. And the fact is,
The
Sean
two
Cunningham
producers
worked on
worked together.
Absolutely. This one not really inspired by true stories though, like the Freddy series. So let's give a basic overview of the storyline from the beginning. Basically, there was a
Child that died while swimming because the lifeguards weren't paying attention and they were doing drugs and
having sex and
in the back of the cabin or whatever.
this poor kid
Instead
drowned.
of watching the kids out swimming, Jason Voorhees drowned. His mother came back as a
You're
worker.
gonna start with the end of the movie, really? You don't have to talk about the mother until the end of when we're talking about it. Yes, I know there's spoilers, but you don't start off with his mother came back to kill everybody. That's not revealed until the end of the film.
Okay.
Anyway, so I would say, 20 some odd years later, they were reopening Camp Crystal Lake, and there was a crazy man in town. You remember that part, right? That came up, you
Camp
can't go
Blood.
to Camp Blood because, everyone's going to be doomed and going to die.
Everyone's gonna die.
Now, that has happened in so many horror movies.
But the crazy guy was right.
Yeah, and the crazy guy's always right. No one ever listens to him. But I think this might have even been the first time that appeared in a horror movie where there was someone that knew that the doom was coming and then nobody listened and thought, oh, that's the crazy drunk from town or whatever.
And then everybody died when they went to camp.
Absolutely. I have to say, in subsequent movies of Friday the 13th, the idea of, there's a bunch of people that get killed here like once a year or so, and, let's go hang out, do drugs, and, just hang out in the woods where there's no protection, no access to police to call. There was no cell phones at the time. Just never made sense to me. It's like, or go to Disney. But anyway, so they get to the camp and they're helping basically build it to get ready. And then,
Get slaughtered?
well, they start getting picked off one by one. Absolutely. Let's see. Do you know what state that Crystal Lake is supposed to be in?
New Jersey.
Absolutely,
It was New Jersey.
And they named it Crystal Lake after
After
the
the-
characters, the Christie family,
Yes.
who their son was the one reopening the camp. He was the one that for some reason they felt they needed to put in Daisy Duke shorts and not have a shirt on, and I was like, that's not necessary. He had the blonde curly hair and 70s mustache that, ugh, Just
Well, it was
creepy.
the 70s then, so
Well, no, it wasn't. It was 1980. It had stopped being the 70s.
for a whole year.
See? But, so it was the Christie family in New Jersey. Not related to the current governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, but, there is actually a Crystal Lake here in Vermont, by the way. Did you know that?
Yes, I did.
Totally unrelated to the movies, but
Which I thought was funny when he took over Manhattan and went across a big lake.
yeah, but I don't think Crystal Lake Camp is actually anywhere near a body of water that would go to, New York. But I guess the one in New Jersey,
I was
that makes
thinking
sense too, because
Champlain.
New Jersey's on the border of New York too. So
Well, I was thinking Champlain.
true.
Big body of water connecting Vermont to.
Oh, and of course, the crazy guy warned this girl Annie, about Camp Blood, and
Yeah.
she never even made it to
Camp Blood.
Camp Blood, as it were. There's a pretty famous movie star that was in this. Last week we talked about Johnny Depp being in Nightmare on Elm Street. Well,
Not
many
his
horror
first,
movies
but-
have people that end up being pretty famous in it. And this one has a guy that's been in so many movies, they have a game named after him to see, how many, it's basically
How many movies you can name?
well, no, it's how many people he's worked with, or how many, links to everybody in Hollywood this guy has. He worked in a movie with this guy, who worked with this guy, so he's 2 guys away from this person he hasn't worked with. It's called the Kevin Bacon game, which pretty much gives a answer as to who we're talking about.
Obviously Johnny Depp, right?
This was his first movie where he was the main, or one of the main characters. He had been in
First death scene.
his first death scene, absolutely. He had been in Animal House, but he was a side character. He definitely wasn't as big a part. Let's see. Well, as much as people call Friday the 13th, they always call them the Jason movies. Kind of like Nightmare on Elm Street's
Right.
the Freddy movies, or Child's Play or the Chucky movies. Not the names of the movies, but that's what people refer to them as. For a Jason movie,
It was kind of funny to start with his mother.
and Jason kills how many people? None in this movie, considering he wasn't the killer. No?
Oh yeah, it was a dream.
Or was it? We'll get to that later. Some other interesting facts. Let's see. Well, did you know that when they were trying to get the money for this movie, they had absolutely no script. All they had was, you saw it at the end of the trailer, where it had
The
word-
Friday the 13th coming and breaking the glass.
That is the only footage they had. No script, just a name and that image. And they sold the idea of making this movie to backers. And they were like, we want it. Oh, and it also had the tagline, the scariest movie ever made. And in other countries, it was considered quite scary.
Because in Australia,
Yep.
you would get a certificate if you were able to finish the whole movie.
If you sat through the entire film, yeah, they gave you a certificate saying that you were not too scared to sit there, which is kind of funny considering, special effects wise, it was pretty cool. Tom Savini did the special effects makeup. He's done so many horror movies. If you see a head getting lopped off in a horror movie, it was probably Tom Savini. I mean, that's the case. He's done it would be ridiculous to sit here and list the movies that he's done the makeup effects for.
Does he still do them now?
Oh yeah, he's even guest starred on The Simpsons. Yep. And there's a lot of things that were in this movie that people consider, common in horror movies. People lost out in the woods or out in the woods for some reason, and some deranged person is killing them. How many movies fit that?
A lot.
A lot.
Yes, the first one that a crazy guy says that they're all gonna die, but not the first that. Yes, the first that he's right, but in every single movie that there's a crazy guy that tells you that you're gonna die, he's right.
And nobody believes him.
Right.
Interesting fact, the guy who did the music, his name is Harry Manfredini. He did the music for Friday the 13th. He also did the music for a movie called Spring Break, which was also produced by Sean Cunningham. Not a horror movie. He used some of the same exact music that he used for this movie as he did in Spring Break. And if you listen close, I mean, it's the same music. It's just not the same feel, because I don't believe it was a horror movie. I've never actually seen Spring Break, but when I heard that, I was like, interesting. Sean Cunningham had never done a horror movie before, and the thing that gave him the idea was Halloween had come out with Jamie Lee Curtis, and it was such a popular movie, and it was making so much money that he said, he found a writer and said, have you ever done a horror movie? And the guy said, no. He said, you wanna? So the guy sat down, and the orders were, watch Halloween and rip it off. That was actually the plan for this movie, was let's rip off Halloween.
They did a good job.
Well, if you think about it, the beginning of Halloween, which we'll review at some point, I guarantee.
Probably around Halloween.
There's an evil that happened at one point, and then years later, they end up, it comes back to bite people, it comes back to cause problems.
Kill everyone.
Michael Myers was a kid, committed a murder, escapes when he's an adult, murders, basically. In this one, Jason Voorhees drowned, years later, murders involving camp counselors, doing drugs and having sex and stuff,
right.
Getting drunk, just doing things that aren't protecting kids. It was inspired by that.
It's making more kids to have drown at their camp.
Well, like I said, his specific orders were rip off Halloween. It's making a lot of money. Let's do this.
And it worked.
Oh, absolutely. He had no idea it would become this huge franchise that it did, Let's see. Some other facts. Jason Voorhees did appear in this movie. Once, at the very end.
Actually, twice. I think.
When was the first time?
I don't remember when, but I think there was a scene showing him drown.
But they actually showed an up close of his face at the end. As originally it was supposed to end with just the girl in the boat, and that was going to be the end, but they decided they wanted one last jump. They wanted to give the people in the audience one last scare, So they hired this kid to have the makeup on and stuff, and to just jump up and grab the girl that had survived. And then she wakes up in the hospital, and they kind of leave it, was it a dream? Did it really happen? And she's like, well, Jason, he's still there, which sets up Jason.
Second and third and the fourth.
Of course, a major issue that I would have with that is, at the end, he's a child when he jumps up and grabs him. And this is supposed to be 20 years after he drowned. So I'm to believe he survived
and
in some way. Stayed the same age, survived. Unless it's kind of a zombie situation, which would make sense, except in
the second
other
one,
movies,
it's
he's
a
an
big
adult.
buff guy.
Absolutely. So, which is it? Did he stay like this zombified child, or did he grow into this big hulking monster that you see in
the
later
second,
films?
third, fourth,
yeah,
sixth, seventh?
And of course, the character of Jason, I like Freddy better because he's got all these funny quips where he comes out and he's got something funny to say.
He's able to get you in your dreams, so there's almost no way to get out of him.
Yeah, you can not be killed by Jason by just not going to Camp Crystal Lake around the 13th in the summer. Don't go camping there. Especially don't do drugs or have, underage sex or whatever, because you're pretty much guaranteed to die. Again, we mentioned before, a lot of these horror movies have that message of the one who survives is the good girl or the good guy who doesn't do those things. And, the bad kids who do these things are going to be punished, and this is definitely one of those. Now, I had this theory when I started letting you watch horror movies that, you started off with watching, milder movies like It, which was made for TV, so they were only allowed to show so
and
much.
Jaws.
Yeah, Jaws, which was rated PG,
Shouldn't have been called a horror movie.
Well,
Wasn't scary.
good movie though. But
Good fish movie.
as I noticed that you were able to handle the
More
fact
and
that
more.
it wasn't real, you started watching scarier movies. But one thing I did keep you away from for quite a while was anything with a nude scene. Because my theory was,
Even fake boobs are real.
absolutely, even fake boobs are real. That's a perfect way of putting it. You knew that the fake blood was fake, the fake deaths were fake, but fake boobs are
and
real enough that I didn't
The
need to
plastic
watch it.
mannequin head falling down the hill.
So,
Fake.
as much as I would have you watch a horror movie where, someone would slit a throat or stab someone in the gut or whatever it was they were doing, there would inevitably be a scene where I'd be like, okay, turn your head, and it was always sexual in nature. Either,
Or a shower scene.
yeah,
But now I've seen Carrie.
well, that starts in a shower. But, most of the Friday the 13th movies, there's either someone skinny dipping in the lake or there's someone taking a shower. And it's always a woman, and they always show it, and it's every single one of these movies.
And it's every 5 scenes.
Well, it's not that bad. This one only had one scene that I really was like, ugh.
The remake was
Well,
like every 2 scenes.
I don't know why they bothered with the remake. All they had to do was just call it part 20 or whatever and continue on their way. But it didn't really follow the story of the first one because the first one was the mom. If they were going to remake it, they should have had it be the mom again.
Well, they showed the mother get killed in the beginning of the remake.
True.
So
They did.
it was catching you up on the first one and just starting off with
believe-
slaughter.
The actress's name who played the mother was Betsy Palmer. And she, once in an interview, said how many movies she had been in. And she goes, of course, I'm not counting Friday the 13th. I don't consider that an actual movie. She made, crap money because it was a independent little film originally that they sold to Paramount. But
And they didn't really show her until like
Much.
the very end.
But she says that she doesn't really consider that to be a movie, which is kind of sad if you think about it. Johnny Depp had no problem with being in Nightmare on Elm Street. He came back for part 6, like we talked about, So, anyway, back to the main story. And this is where there's definitely going to be some spoilers that you've already jumped ahead to. But, come to find out, they start wondering, who's killing the people. First of all, they have to stay clueless for a while that people are dying around them. They don't even realize.
Didn't even know that Annie didn't make it.
Right, exactly.
Or Anne.
They thought she just, bugged out and didn't show up. They didn't know that,
She died in the woods.
Exactly. But as they start piecing together that there's someone killing, it gets down to, like the one last girl basically who figures it out. And it's, she's thinking, is it this Jason who I've heard this story about? And no, it was dear old sweet mom. But before we get into that scene, let's do our commercials for the week. Gory Story Time is brought to you by Mama Voorhees Homestyle Apple Pies. Mama Voorhees Homestyle Apple Pies are made from the freshest ingredients. When you are looking for homemade taste that only a loving mother could make, grab a knife and hack yourself a piece of Mama Voorhees Homestyle Apple Pies. And also by
Your local Red Cross, who reminds you when methodically slaughtering 18-year-old co-eds to donate blood.
Absolutely. Gotta donate blood.
Lots of it.
But anyway, back to Mama Voorhees, as it were. it's funny because they show all these deaths and you see what she's doing, and she's pretty
Good at it.
yeah, I would say she's pretty badass, to be honest. I wouldn't expect you to use that term, but I will. But then when she has the final fight, how would you describe her fight with the girl at the end? I mean, did she seem that tough?
No, she wasn't even trying, it looked like.
I mean, she seemed like an older lady that was... She had no street fighting skills, I'll put it that way.
Well, she did up until, like, the end.
No, but it's funny because shouldn't she have been, like, just as tough as she was when she killed...
Everyone
up until this girl, and this girl started, like, beating her back, and it wasn't like she was some MMA fighter.
Women cut her head off, but still.
But I guess we'll get into what was your favorite scene?
It was Kevin Bacon's death. When he was lying in bed, he was started to smoke a cigarette, and Mama Voorhees was under the bed, grabbed him on the forehead, and stuck an arrow through the bed through his throat.
Which was probably one of the more graphic scenes, because most of the time you'll notice they cut away and then you would see the dead body with the wound, like the girl that got hit in the head with the axe, right? You see the axe coming, and then
you see the lamp swing, and then
you see it already in her head.
Yeah.
You don't actually see it enter, because again, with special effects at the time, they couldn't really show it. Now they would make it look like the axe, you could watch the axe enter the skull, But at the time, it just...
No.
Unless they did like a rubber head, like they did in the final scene with the mom, where she got her head cut off. And you saw the head roll, and it was obviously not...
real.
Yeah. They did a pretty good job considering the budget. Again, a lot of these movies start off low.
Jason was able to find his mother's head.
Well, that doesn't happen until part 2, so we can...
But still.
I mean, hopefully we can discuss horror movies on this show for quite a while, and eventually we'll get to that one. My favorite scene, I would have to say, was the scene where Annie, the first girl who dies in this time period, because if you remember, it starts with 2 counselors having sex, getting murdered in 1958. But the first one of this group, I would say, was my favorite, where she gets picked up. You don't get to see who's driving the Jeep or whatever that picks her up hitchhiking. And they pass the road to Crystal Lake, and
she notices, they stop, she gets out.
No, they don't stop. She jumps out of the moving Jeep, remember?
Oh.
It doesn't even slow down. She's like, can we stop? Can we stop? And she starts getting freaked out, and she jumps out. Then the Jeep stops, and the killer, nameless at the time, chases her down in the woods and slits her throat with basically, most people would call it a Rambo knife at this point, because it's the kind that Rambo carried, which, not a movie we're going to review, because...
Not a horror movie.
Definitely not horror. Good movie, but, not what we're doing. What was your least favorite scene?
It wasn't really a scene, but before you saw Mama Voorhees, it looks like it wasn't really a female killing everybody when you saw from the neck down.
It was usually a man on set that they used for those scenes. Betsy Palmer, the actress who played Mrs. Voorhees, did not come in for those scenes. That actually was guys. But then they tried to match the pants and boots she was wearing at the end to what you saw from the neck down earlier in the movie. So not only did you notice that, but you were absolutely correct. It wasn't her.
Okay.
Nowadays, they would probably have her come in just so that they could do that. Give her a baggy shirt so you couldn't tell that, on the top she was a woman or something. Wouldn't have like the motherly sweater that she was wearing in the end of that movie. But
Bad Sweater Day?
My least favorite scene in the movie, boy, I like most of them, but I didn't like the fact that out of all the deaths, there was one that you didn't really get to see. And she basically trips over the dead body afterwards. And, when I go to see a horror movie, especially like a Jason movie, where the whole thing is what cool way is he going to hack this person up? That's the point of those movies. To just stumble across a random dead body, it's like, wait a minute. You
How
could
did
have
that
shown
die?
that. Like, okay, that person disappeared and we assumed they were going to die, but this is exactly the kind of movie to show that in. So I guess it kind of bugged me that there was a death that they didn't really show or explain.
And there was a second, actually, because later on in the movie, she also finds the body, like, stapled to the door with arrows.
Well, I wouldn't call it stapled if it was with an arrow.
Arrowed to the
Hung
door.
to the door.
Hung to the door with
Whatever.
arrows throughout the body and in his head.
And like last time, we're going to do this every episode. We're going to talk about how many deaths were in the film. So, do you remember?
10.
Exactly. There were 10 deaths, which, unlike Freddy with only 4, the Nightmare on Elm Street, this one had a higher body count.
Started with 2.
Yeah, I mean, it started exactly. I mean, the movie begins with 2 teenagers getting killed. Still not as high as some other movies, I mean, there's classic non-horror movies that have, 10 deaths. I'm sure it's got to be close to that in, like, The Godfather and other gangster movies and stuff, War movies especially. I mean,
Scarface.
Oh, Scarface, there was definitely more than that,
Like 20.
But Scarface was also considered pretty graphic. Unfortunately, as good a movie as it is, not really horror, so that won't
Right.
be on our list. But, well, I guess we're getting close to the end. What would you say is your rating for this movie on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would have to say it would be a 7.
Isn't that what you gave Nightmare on Elm Street?
I don't think so.
I think you gave that a 7 and I gave it an 8. But just why would you say a 7?
Because they did really good with the special effects for what they did have. But it wasn't the best movie. Kind of like I said for Nightmare on Elm Street. It wasn't the best movie, but they did really good for what they did have.
And, like Sean Cunningham had said to the writer after he read the script, he said, you took Mom and Apple Pie, which is what inspired that commercial that I wrote, and turned it on its head. Because, Mom, she's supposed to be the one that you can turn to for anything, and she's loving and sweet, and they made her the serial killer. And,
The first one.
Yeah. Well, the idea of that just takes that sweet mother and, it turns it on its head, like he said, So I would say that's
Our second episode of Gory Story Time. I was your host, Jason.
And I was his co-host, Craig. And sweet dreams.